Warning, the following may contain dragons. Join fantasy authors Phil Tucker, Timandra Whitecastle, David Benham, Benedict Patrick, and Josiah Bancroft as they roll dice and take on the bad guys in a game of Dungeons and Dragons. 5 authors, 5 worlds, 1 adventure. It's time to get crit-faced.
Hello everyone, and welcome to a very special prequel episode of Crit-Faced. My name is Benedict Patrick. I am the Dungeon Master in our game of Dungeons and Dragons. I am the one who will be guiding our heroes around the Curse of Strahd Dungeons and Dragons adventure. However, that's not what we're here to find out about today. Today we are, for this exclusive prequel episode for the Crit-Faced fan group, we are going to be chatting with our 4 adventurers, and we're going to get a little bit into the headspace of these fantasy authors who have created their characters for this adventure. We're going to find out a little bit about their decision-making process, and we're going to find out a little bit more about the history of our characters, and hopefully that will give us a bit of insight into how their characters are acting and behaving throughout the adventure. So without further ado, we are going to move on to our first interview. Alright guys, so our first stop, we're going to have a wee chat with Josiah Bancroft, fantasy author, Josiah Bancroft. Hi Josiah, how are you doing?
Hello, doing well, thank you.
First question Josiah, I'm going to ask you, because not everybody who's listened, or who's listening to this could be some people's first experience of Crit-Faced. So could you please tell us who your character is that you're going to be taking on this adventure?
Sure. My character is Jean Marlamé. Jean Marlamé is I guess technically a bard. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. He's a bard, but he's much more than that. Really, he's a jack of all trades. He's a master of none. He's an actor, a musician, a man about town. He is, in appearance, not necessarily a remarkable man. He's a middle-aged, middle height. He has a middling paunch and facial features that might not strike one as handsome at first glance, but with the right application of makeup and lighting, he is quite attractive, at least in his own mind. Jean is, I would say, a little bit of a rogue, and perhaps overestimates both his charm and ability. But he has a heart of 10.
Great. Okay. So Jean actually comes from your own world, a world of your own creation, right, from your novels. So just in case people aren't aware of the details of that world, would you like to give us an idea of what kind of place Jean comes from?
Yeah, absolutely. So he comes from the world or the nation of and at the center of this nation of is the Tower of Babel, which is this immense structure, many thousands of feet high, which is composed of all these different levels, and each level is its own kingdom, and I call these kingdoms ringdoms. And so he's from one of the lower levels in the tower. He's from the ringdom of New Babel, which is sort of, I would say, an industrial sort of ringdom, but in this ringdom he plays sort of a entertaining role. He's an entertainer. That's where he hails from.
Okay, great. So my final question, and there's a little bit of spoilers going on here, but at the very beginning of our adventure, Jean finds himself whisked away from the world, from New Babel, where he lives. Before we get to that, have you any idea what Jean's life has been like up to then? What kind of things Jean is up to just before he's stolen away?
Well, if you ask him, he would say he had just performed in several very successful plays and had been involved in some very successful troupes. But in fact, he was just coming back from a middling performance at a party for a count. He would say it's an earl, but it was maybe actually the cousin of a count, where he did some juggling, some light impressions, some pantomime, none of which was very well received. He played his concertina in a fashion which they would describe as honking, and got a little bit drunk in the doing. So after this meager performance, in all fairness, he had stumbled into an alley in a state of deep inebriation, and that's when he began to feel quite strange.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, I am looking forward to picking up this in the first episode of Critfest.
Me as well.
Great. Looking forward to getting to find out a bit more about Sean. Well, all right, Josiah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to head over to Timandra Whitecastle now. Tim, how are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for asking. So we're just going to explore your character a little bit. And now some of the people listening to this will not have met your Dungeons and Dragons character before. So could you give us a brief description of who you're playing?
I play a monk, Master Sunna Orsoline, who is from the island cities of Babuk. And she's lawful good. Because she's a monk and very studious and diligent and a dutiful person. She's fairly short, got brown hair, brown eyes, I think. I think that's what I said. And is quite nondescript, but always wears clothing that is far too large. And picture like this massive kimono, so she's got huge pockets in which she carries all her stuff, and she obviously as a monk has a quarterstaff along with her and a few secrets up her humongous sleeves.
Excellent, thank you. So one of the cool things about Critfest is that the characters that everyone's playing come from your own worlds, from your novels that you've written. So for any of our listeners who have not yet read your books, could you maybe give us an idea what type of world Master Sunna comes from?
Well, the world is from the Living Blade series that I write, and it's a very grim, dark, so let's say a low fantasy world. There is very little magic in this world, but there are fantasy institutions, there's a huge order of wandering monk-like people called pilgrims. And they have lots and lots of temples and shrines all over the place. And we obviously have the typical, fantasy empire that is slowly but surely being eroded. So the northern part is already sort of fallen. There aren't many troops there anymore, and that's where most of the action of Touch of Iron plays. But Master Sunna comes from let's say a fantasy Venice kind of place,
right.
On the other side of the world, so on the other side of the empire, and so she's relatively close by the mother temple in the capital of the world, or at least the capital of the empire, and she's a master of the council. So if you imagine the Jedi Council, which I totally do not rip off for this, and never will, obviously, because Disney will sue me. But if you imagine a Jedi Council, she is on the council, but she's not Master Yoda, and she's not Mace Windu, and she's not Obi-Wan Kenobi, but she's one of the guys.
Right, excellent. Okay, and then final question. And it's a bit of a spoiler for anyone who's not listened to any of our episodes yet, but at the very beginning of the adventure, Master Sunna is taken away from her world into a very different type of land. But can you give us some kind of idea about what Master Sunna is up to just before she is taken?
Well, she's actually world-shattering events have been happening in the Living Blade series. So at this point, it's like at the end of book 2, something drastic happens, and unfortunately, the main capital city of the Empire is destroyed, and this is where this is the heart of the entire world. And there's also the mother temple of the Pilgrim Order is in Arun as well, the Kandarian Empire. And so Master Sunna is on her way, riding as fast as she possibly can, and if the horse dies, then she will go on foot to travel in haste to this place and see what has become of her order, and especially of her very good friend, Master Kit Harlow. And she hopes, of course, that he's still alive and well, but who knows? It's a difficult time.
Okay, excellent. Really exciting, and we're looking forward to finding out more about Master Sunna as we keep playing.
Yay!
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, next on our list is fantasy author extraordinaire Phil Tucker. Hi, Phil.
Hey.
So we're here today to have a chat about your character in our Dungeons and Dragons adventure. So, like, some people listening to this will already be fans of Crit Feast, but for some people this will be their first time finding out about your character. So could you give us a wee introduction, please?
Absolutely. So I am playing Lord Talfrin, who is he's a sorcerer. He's an older man, very dignified, grouchy, sort of the equivalent of transporting an Oxford Don into a fantasy setting, with a unfortunately massively humped back, bristling handlebar mustaches, a monocle, and a penchant for wearing fashionable clothing that was fashionable maybe 30 years ago. So yeah, he's an absolute delight to have at tea parties.
Okay, excellent. So one of the exciting things about this podcast is that your character and everyone's characters are they come from your own fantasy world, the world that you write your stories in. So for people who haven't experienced your work before, could you tell us a little bit about the world that Lord Talfrin comes from?
Yeah, so he comes from my series, The Chronicles of the Black Gate. It's some complex world building going on there that I won't bore everyone with, but his part of the world is a land called Enoia, and it is connected to the rest of the world through massive portals that people can sort of step through and teleport to the far-flung parts of the Empire. But his landscape, his land is sort of, out of all the other places, it's the most sort of medieval European. So you have your traditional castles and all the trappings that people associate traditionally with fantasy. He comes from the hinterlands of Enoia. His family was once much more important and powerful than it has become. He's the sole surviving member, and he's allowed everything to sort of crumble and sort of fall apart as he devotes himself to his studies.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then finally, Phil, at the beginning of our adventure, Lord Talfrin is pulled away from Enoia, and he finds himself in a strange new land. But can you give us any idea about what life is like for him just before that happens? What's he up to just before our adventure begins?
He was basically, without quite realizing it, waiting to die. He is a forgotten lord, moldering away in his slowly collapsing castle with less than a skeleton crew of servants to basically put a tray of food outside his study door every morning. Contact with others had sort of become reduced to a bare minimum, and his life was filled with endless scrolls and manuscripts and grandiose plans for books that he meant to write and studies he meant to perform that he never gets around to, and he sort of had given up hope of ever actually accomplishing anything or living up to his family name, and sort of resigned himself to becoming a footnote to a footnote to a footnote when he does eventually die and his castle is abandoned. So it was a dismal existence, but one that was shot through with moments of sort of literary ecstasy when late at night he'd be reading books that would set him afire. And for brief moments, he'd think that, he could really still perform some sort of great feats of writing or creativity. But inevitably, come the morning, he resigns himself to the fact that it's just not going to happen. So out of the entire group, I would venture to say that Ravenloft is he's the only one that Ravenloft was the best thing to happen to him.
Well, it's going to be really interesting finding out more about him as we keep playing.
Yeah.
All right, thanks very much, Phil, and I'll see you in the game.
All right, I'll see you in Ravenloft Hell.
Okay, guys, next we're heading over to David Benham. David, hello.
How are you doing, Benedict?
I'm doing very well, thank you very much. David, we're here today to find out a little bit more about your Dungeons & Dragons character. Some of the listeners here will have already listened to the show, but for many people listening, this is the first time hearing about your character. So would you like to give us a wee introduction, please?
My character, his name is Kellen MacRag. He is a surly, ill-tempered barbarian, carries around a massive axe and a distinct barnyard-type odor. He's not too friendly. He's slow to trust, but at least where we are in the adventure, I think he's feeling some loyalty toward his new friends.
Okay, David, the second question I'm going to ask then. So, Kellen, one of the exciting things about Critfest is that everyone's characters come from their own story world, from their novels. So Kellen comes from a world you have already written about. For any of the listeners here who have not yet read your stories, could you give us a wee bit of an insight into what kind of world Kellen comes from?
Sure. Kellen comes from the world of my Requiem for Heroes trilogy, which I am presently 2/3 of the way through. The setting is kind of a quasi-medieval European type setting. Although, unlike a lot of other fantasy worlds, there are no elves or dwarves or fairy folk or that sort of thing. It's a little darker place. It's a place where the gods are said to have died 1,000 years ago. Faith and magic both are the stuff of myth. And it's a land where the king is dying. It's besieged by enemies both within and without. And so it's kind of Kellen comes from kind of a desperate land at a desperate time in its history. And so that's the angle that he approaches things from. Is he's kind of, as I said earlier, kind of surly and not too pleasant an individual at times.
Brilliant. Okay, and slight spoilers here for anyone who's not listened to the show yet, but at the very beginning of our adventure, Kellen is pulled away from your world into a world that's very different. But could you maybe give us a wee idea of what's happening in Kellen's life just up to the moment that he's pulled away?
Kellen and his two brothers were banished from their clan due to their father being accused of cowardice on the battlefield and being executed. And now he's grown into adulthood. He's developed some skills with a battle axe, and so he's headed for revenge. So when he pops up into the mist-filled world of where he finds himself now, he's not too happy that he's been, I guess, sidetracked.
Excellent. Okay, well, looking forward to finding out more about Kellen as we keep playing. David, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
And there we have it, a fascinating insight into how these Dungeons & Dragons characters were created and how they tie in with our players' own fantasy worlds. We'll find out more about these characters as they keep playing through the Curse of Strahd, so please keep joining us weekly to find out what happens next in our game of Dungeons & Dragons. Alright, take care and talk to you soon.